Am I ready to talk about Before Midnight? Am I really ready to talk about Before Midnight? Fuck, dude. So Before Midnight takes place, again, same year that it was released, 2013. And funny enough, I was reading about the production history of these films, and the gaps were not really intended. The first movie did really well financially, but it was just one of those, like, they weren't really planned. They were like, oh, we could do a sequel, right? And then it only ended up happening, about 9 years later that they ended up filming it. That they ended up filming, before sunset. And it ended up creating, and obviously they worked with that, and they made it, the character's 10 years later. And the kind of similar thing happened with Before Midnight. They went on to other projects, and then they said, you know what? I think the whole movie came together in about a year. Like, I mean, you watch these, and I think Before Sunset was filmed in, like, 12 days or something like that. I can believe that. Like, I was really curious, like, how long... It's just them talking. Although that is pretty difficult, to be fair. Honestly, just, like, I think I read, like, the longest continuous shot of them talking is, like, 11 minutes long. Dude, imagine having, like, a conversation on, like, a scripted, somewhat conversation on camera for 11 minutes, where you have, like, objectives, things that you have to talk about, and making it all seem natural. 11 minutes straight. You don't know how long 11 minutes is, right? And bouncing off of each other, and again, with the same very natural tones of just, like, or natural rhythm of, like, they talk over each other, and they do those funny things where, like, they correct each other on a word or something, and then they just sort of talk, and it's just like this gibberish, like, you can't tell what they're saying. They're just, kind of thing for, like, a second before one of them just keeps talking about whatever they're saying. So Before Midnight is very similar. So, okay, so Kat knew nothing about this movie going into it. I knew, like, two details. I knew, like, only two things. And I didn't spoil her on it, but so the film opens, and immediately there's a huge contrast. It's super noticeable. So the funny thing about these films is that they are so small in scale and so small in scope, and they're kind of just the same thing, right? They're just it's like Tetris. This is the second time I'm relating these movies to Tetris, but it's like Tetris. Tetris is such a simple game, but when you add, like, one, and it's perfect in its execution, but when you add or change, like, one element, it has these drastic implications on how the game feels. And this is the same thing, right? It's this simple formula, but there's a gigantic curveball thrown in that the opening of this movie is the first time that we've had one of these talking scenes, which I'll call it. Like, the first two movies are basically entirely talking scenes with Jesse and a character that's not Celine. It's Jesse in an airport with his son, Henry. And Henry's about to get on a flight, and it's them walking and talking. And now there were, of course, other people that they talked to in the other movies, in the first two movies, but those were, like, just background people, basically. They were pretty much just unnamed. Oh, they run into a guy. Hey, thank you, hi. Hey, can I have one of these? They are very much like the film, the first, like the visual language of these movies is almost like Jesse and Celine are like these just twin suns orbiting each other, and everything kind of revolves around them. Every character just sort of passes through or around them, right? And for the first time, we're getting a change up to the formula. And immediately, right? Immediately, I think that communicates just how important Henry is to Jesse, just how important his son is to him. That this kind of framing of just two people walking or standing and talking is exclusively to like him and Celine, the most important person in his life, right? And now Henry's in that position. Now Henry's in that place. Not to say that Celine isn't, but it's showing like that she's not important to him anymore. But it's to show you that things are different. His world is bigger. And it's this uncomfortable scene. It's this weird scene, right? Thankfully, the kid who plays Henry is pretty good at acting. He's a decent actor for like the 5 minutes he's on screen, right? So you don't know any context for what's going on, but from what you can tell, Henry has been on vacation with Jesse. He's been with him for the whole summer, and he says it was the best summer of his life, right? And now he's going back, presumably to go live with his mom. So you can imagine what happened, right, in between films. And Jesse's like really, he wants to be involved in his kid's life, and he's talking to him about like, hey, you know, he's trying to make conversation and be a dad. He's trying to be a dad for him, right? And Henry's just kind of sort of aloof. He's just sort of not engaging with him super much. And you're like, oh, is that just because he's like 13 or something, or you know what? And he's just sort of like, you know, picking food out from like the fucking store at the airport, and they're at the terminal, and he's about to see him off, and Henry, I guess, plays some sort of instrument. He's in like an orchestra or something like that. And Jesse's like, yeah, I'm gonna fly out to Chicago, where, you know, I guess he and his mom live. I'm gonna fly out to Chicago. You know, I'll be there at your recital. Don't worry. And Henry goes, could you not be at the recital? I don't really want you at the recital. And Jesse is like, what? And there's this, you know, that subtle kind of blank look of confusion of like, what do you mean? Like, and kind of like hurt, and what are you talking about? And he goes, and his Henry just says, well, when you're there, it stresses mom out, and that stresses me out. And it would just be easier for everyone if you didn't show up. And Jesse's like, oh, okay. And it's like, you're like, fuck, it's awkward as shit, dude. And like, it's at the perfect age where he can actually like be articulate, right? Like about 13 years old, and he can articulate like, you know, being stressed and what causes these sorts of things. And he, you know, I think the conversation ends on a positive note. Like, he's like, no, this was the best summer of my life. Like, this was awesome. I had a great time, and thanks, and I love you, Dad. But, you know, what he said before still stands, basically. And then he leaves, and Jesse just watches him go, and, you know, he's watching him walk into the plane, down the, what do you call it? The little tunnel thing to get to the plane. And he's just watching him, and you can tell he's got so much love in his eyes. He's got so much love in his eyes for his boy. And you're like, fuck, dude, like, that's a really difficult thing to hear as a parent, I'm sure. I'm not even a parent, but like, Jesus Christ. So you know things are a little weird, right? You know things are weird. And I think one of the biggest strengths of these movies is that all you're seeing is these singular days in these people's lives. And all the things left unsaid create this nice ambiguity where you can kind of fill in. It's like real life is complicated. And these people have complicated relationships. And the things that they don't go into detail on, I think, help the story. They help the audience create their own idea of, like, you know, make their own inferences into the characters, I guess. So Jesse, he's just standing there, and, you know, once Henry's all gone and he's out of sight, he just sort of stands there, and he slowly turns around and he walks back out of the airport, and there's this tracking shot of him walking out of the airport. And again, for the first time in the visual language of these movies, we have a tracking shot of someone walking, of Jesse walking alone for the first time. He isn't with Celine. He's not, not with Henry. He's not around other people. Not really around other. I mean, he's in an airport, but he's not with anyone. And there's like a loneliness in this like 10-second shot of, 15, 20 seconds, however long it takes. There's a loneliness immediately that you can feel, a disconnection. It's palpable on the screen. He walks out of the airport, and it kind of pans out, and it's a Greek airport. There's like Greek lettering. So you imagine they're in Greece, and he walks outside, and the camera follows him, and he walks to a car, and who's standing outside the car but Celine, And Kat popped off. She's like, "Yeah, boy." And he gives her a hug and a kiss. He gets back in the car, and as he gets back into the car, it passes over the back seat, and they have these 2 twin daughters. And Kat was like, "Yeah, boy, they had kids." And so that was the one thing I knew. That was the one thing I knew going into this film, was that yes, in the third film they're married. Well, there's another thing that I knew that I had an idea of. So they're driving back, right? And the twins are asleep in the back seat. And they're these little kids, right? They're maybe, I don't know. They look pretty young. They're these little kids. They're asleep in the back seat. Jesse and Celine are they're talking, and these things start getting set up, right? These things start getting set up as you're sort of figuring out what's going on. That, Celine says that, like, "Oh, Henry told me." So what you learn later, just for added context, they've basically been on a 6-week vacation in Greece because Jesse was invited by a writer friend, and it's like he's gonna go hang out with a bunch of writers and their families. He brought his family. He invited Henry. Like he's doing a fucking good dad thing. He lives, I think they live in Europe, I want to say. And I think they live in Paris. That's, yeah. So he doesn't get to see his son very often. Like maybe in the summers or something for a bit. But, take him on a 6-week vacation to Greece. That's so fun. It's a nice thing, right? And they've been there, and all these. There's a couple different. There's like 4 different families basically, and Celine tells him, "Oh, Henry told me." He doesn't want me to tell you this, but this, I guess, one of the other daughters that's around his age, they kissed. They had a little summertime romance going on this this vacation, and Jesse's like, "What? That's crazy." And he's just. Again, just very natural kind of reactions, like, "Wow, that's so funny." Oh, you think they kept in touch? Like, you think they exchanged, like, how do they keep in touch? And he's like, I guess Facebook or something. It's just, the dialogue in this is again, still, again, everything that's good about the first 2 movies in terms of, like, dialogue and stuff and the acting is still on point here. But there's these other things. That's, like, the first thing. And the second thing is that, like, a little ways into their conversation, she gets a call from Henry, and they're about to take off. And and it's kind of weird that, like, he didn't call Jesse or something like that, right? Like, why didn't he call his dad? He called Celine. And she picks up the phone. She goes, "Hi, sweetie." So you can infer that they're, they've got they actually do have a close relationship. Henry and Celine actually do like each other. And Jesse starts talking about some concerns he has, and how, the thing that he feels like Henry is in these very formative years, and he feels bad about missing out on them. And obviously what Henry said to him at the airport has really affected him. And he's, starts bringing up, maybe we should move to Chicago to be closer to him, or like, would you consider that? And Celine doesn't really take too well to this suggestion, because she's still on her environmental thing, and she has like a new job opportunity basically, that she could work for like the French government on like a conservation thing, and she's interested. She's maybe a little hesitant. She doesn't know if she wants to do it, but it's like a big opportunity for her. And she's just thinking about it, and she's like, well, there's you can already see the fucking conflict. They're having different ideas about what their future should be. So they get back, and they start having this bit of an argument, right? They get into just a bit of but it's not a huge one. They just get into a slight little argument in the car. They're also trying not to wake the kids up. And they cool it down. They chill out. They get back to the hotel, or to the estate they've been staying on, with this whole group of writers. And then we get this whole segment of basically this is like the last day that they're spending before they take off in the morning. And I lost my train of thought. Whoa. And again, we have a huge break in the visual language of the film, because we get these big scenes of Jesse and Celine talking to other people. Jesse is with all the men, he's with all the husbands and the men and stuff, and Celine is with the women. She's inside, and they're making like a salad. They're gonna eat, a lunch later. And there's this distance that is communicated visually throughout the film. It's almost a little lonely. Like you as a viewer, you feel like Jesse and Celine so much better, almost like they're friends that you've known. That's the best way I can describe it. And now you're with these other characters who you don't really know at all, and it feels kind of lonely as a viewer, right? And not that they're like mean or bad or anything. They all seem nice and funny, and they get along, but it's different. There's that distance. The film also has a kind of colder tone to its colors, like a little grayer, right? So they have this dinner, and again, this is the first time where it's like a group conversation. It's the first group conversation that they have. And you just get this feeling that intimacy and that closeness, that connection that they had in those first two movies has been a little dissolved. And obviously, right, of course, it's not that like having a group conversation is bad for their relationship. That's not what I'm saying. You have to imagine they've had a billion of these over the years. But from the audience's point of view of what the film is trying to communicate, this is a different thing that we're seeing. The writers get to choose what we see, and that informs very directly, because these films have such a simple style, very directly informs what is going on with the whole feel of the movie is different. The whole feeling is different. And they have a lot of these conversations about death, about or things ending, right? And there's couples of, what I liked was there was couples of different age groups. So there's Jesse and Celine, they're in their 40s. I think Jesse says he's 41 at one point. So they're about in their 40s. There's another couple who maybe actually looks about the same age, maybe a little older. I couldn't quite tell. There's sort of the host, who is an older man, and the wife of like his best friend, who he's also invited, and that friend has passed away. And then there's a young couple who are like 20 somethings, and there's a funny like there's this very funny like sign of the times thing. I think the fact that these films take place in the year that they were released is actually really, it adds a lot to them, because it's this young couple and this young Greek couple, I think, or I don't exactly know what nationality both of them are. They got accents. And they are describing how they met in a very similar kind of like fairy tale romance kind of way. This romantic evening they spent with each other. And then they had to like leave and say goodbye at the end of the night. And they're like, oh, how did you keep in touch? And they're like, oh, we Skyped. We Skyped, every day, every other day for a year or 2 years before we saw each other again. It's this very like sign of the times thing. That like, man, dude, imagine if Jesse and Celine had Skype. Would have been completely different. It's this very place and time thing, and it makes things feel kind of special, you know? Not that the way that Jesse and Celine, not that their circumstances were like more valuable than this young couple's, but that it was different. In their own way, this young couple is having, you know, their own very special, valuable story, and Jesse and Celine had their own, just with these different circumstances because of the times and what was available to them. You couldn't just DM somebody. You could. It was 1995. You could. You know, most people didn't even have computers. Most regular people. Only big nerds. Specifically at that point. Excuse me. And so basically it's for the last night that they're going to spend in Greece. Two of their friends have purchased for Jesse and Celine a hotel room for them to spend the night, you know, romantic night away from the kids, away from everyone else. You know, you can imagine. And we get one of these. Oh, I should mention really quickly, in the scene where Jesse's talking to his other writer friends, he's talking about this book he wants to write of these people who all. The book is basically, would be centered entirely around a bunch of people with different perspectives. The perspectives of different people who have different. What would you call them? I guess mental conditions, but they're more like specifically about perspective and memory. So, you know, there's one person he describes who, and these I think are all based off of real things that exist that might be really rare, but they're like real conditions that have been recorded medically. Like one guy who cannot recognize faces. He can't recognize faces. You know, he looks at his wife of 20 years and she looks like a stranger. He doesn't know her. Well, he knows her, but she doesn't look familiar. And he looks at his own face in the mirror in the morning and he doesn't even recognize himself. And then, you know, another person who's the exact opposite. It's this old lady or something, or this woman who recognizes everyone. She has a completely eidetic memory of faces, and she remembers everyone by face. And she lives in this big city, but to her, everyone is perfectly familiar. And she sees someone on you know, walk past her on the sidewalk, and she said, "Oh, I took the train with them 5 years ago," kind of thing, right? And you know, someone else who perhaps maybe every time they look at something, every time he looks at something, he sees the end of it. You know, he sees a fruit and he imagines it, you know, being spoiled or being rotten or being a tree or something like that. He sees a person and he imagines what they're going to be like at the end of their life, and he sees, you know, the transience of everything. And you're like, okay, this is symbolism. This is stuff that is thematically relevant. So Jesse and Celine, they take a walk in the evening to this hotel room, or it's like it starts in the like around noon after their lunch, and for the first time in the movie, we get one of the classic scenes of them walking and talking, and it's so nice again. It feels like you're with friends again. It's so nice, and a lot of their conversations are about death. It's about like extremely long-term things. There's a kind of realism and a kind of a sober kind of realism and pragmatism to the way that they're talking about, like, you know, which one of us do you think is going to die first? You know, would you go to my funeral, or what would you do for my funeral, or something like that? And they're in Greece, right? They go to these this like super ancient church from like the 1200s or something like that, and they're just surrounded by this ancient history. And they just keep walking, and they're surrounded by all these ruins, right? These ruins of things from the past. And they're and all of these things are about the end of things. Obviously, death is like the most extreme manifestation of an end, right? And they have like one conversation. They have one topic where they I think Celine asks, one of them asks the other one like, no, Celine asks, would you, if we were on that train, if it was us right now, and we'd never met, and you saw me on that train as I am right now, as you are right now, would you have asked me to get off with you? And he's like, he just can't answer it. It's such a difficult hypothetical question. But the fact that he can't answer it is like, there's some hesitation. There's some second guessing about the relationship. She asked him, and she does this in every fucking movie. She asks him these trap questions, this female shit that she does, where she asks him these unwinnable questions. And she did this in Before Sunset, where she says something like, do I look prettier, or do I look prettier now, or was I prettier back then? Like, what the fuck? There's no right answer to that. And he goes, or no, how do I look now compared to then? Something like that. And he goes, skinnier. And she goes, oh, was I fat? Do you think I was fat back then? He's like, God, motherfucker. Why do you even ask these questions? You just want to be mad at me. You want an excuse to be mad at me. What's your deal? She asks him a question like that, and he's like, it's like, fuck, how do I win with that? So, and God, I mean, at the start, like, he mentions, he's like, I didn't tell you, but I got a text right before lunch, right before our meal, that my grandmother died. And she's like, oh, God, damn. And he's like, yeah, no, well, maybe it was his mom, his mother or his grandmother. I don't remember. A relative of his died. And he's like, yeah, I just want to bring it up and all that. And it's just it's this constant thing throughout the film as they're talking about the end of things. And it's a little foreboding. So about 30 minutes into this hour-and-a-half movie, they get to the hotel room, and you're like, oh no. Wait. The whole rest of the movie is going to take place in this hotel room. Oh, that's not good, is it? That's not good. And it starts off fine. They get in there, and it's so nice in here, and there's air conditioning, and they're about to have sex and all that, and then right before they really get into it, everything's going great. We love each other. Oh, you're so sexy. Celine's phone starts ringing, and she gets up, and it's a call from Henry, and he just landed. And Jesse's like lying in the bed, and he's like, and he's just kind of motioning to her, like, oh, like, let me talk to him. And then she just, finishes talking to him, and then she just, then they hang up, and she puts his phone away, and Jesse's like, what, can I not talk to my son? Like, can I not talk to my, what the fuck? And or did he not ask to talk to me also? Like, and now it comes back up again, right? And now the argument starts. Julie Delpy has her dress off. She's got her floppy titties out, and they're having an argument. And Ethan Hawke's fucking naked man legs are out, and they're having an argument. Oh boy. So, and this is what I knew about this film, was there's some arguing, at least. I had an inkling, like, oh no. So the reason this was a terrible date night movie is that Before Midnight is an hour-long argument. And it's not just like a regular argument with a couple. This is an end of the marriage argument that they're having. this is some real intense shit that gets brought up. And throughout the course of their stay in this hotel room, literally decades of baggage gets brought up. And it's fucking intense. And it's uncomfortable. And, I mean, Kat and I weren't like, it wasn't like a personal discomfort. It was just like, oh God, you know, it's real. It feels real. It feels like you're watching a couple argue, and with a serious argument, with some real shit that they're talking about, and some real problems that they've got. And it's just, oh, you know, it's not the same kind of like tear-jerking, you know, heartwarming romance of the first two films. It's real. Well, you could say the first two are real in their own ways, but this is real in a different way. And, yeah. It's it's harder to summarize than Before Sunset. Also because Before Sunset's a lot shorter, but, all this stuff gets brought up, and it's really interesting because at the end of the movie, I asked Kat, you know, I didn't cry during this one, by the way. At the end of the movie, I asked her, do you think one of them is more right than the other one? Do you think one of them has more of a point? And she couldn't say. And I couldn't either. And part of it is that, like, excuse me, when I talk about ambiguity, right? I think it's really important, especially in this film, because the things that they're talking about, I sort of get the sense, well, number one, these people need marriage counseling. They need to go to couples therapy. Because it seems like both of them have a lot of shit that they just have not told each other. Feelings that they haven't told each other that have just kind of been allowed to fester. And you learn a lot about their lives. And there's completely natural exposition that happens. They don't have to like just spell everything out for you. You know, when a thing comes up and they mention it with enough detail that you can figure out what happened. For instance, you know, Jesse, you learn that Jesse and Celine are probably actually not married. Jesse basically divorced his ex-wife, and then Celine got pregnant, and they were living in New York for about 2 years. I imagine this is probably where Henry was also living, because Jesse lived in New York in the second film. Ooh, my neck. And you learn that, like, when Celine got pregnant, for the last, I imagine, like, I think, like, trimester or whatever, you sort of figure, she wanted to go back to France because when she gave birth, she wanted to be with her mom. And Jesse, of course, came with her. And while he was gone, the ex-wife took it as an opportunity to basically get full custody of Henry and then move to Chicago and leave Jesse completely behind in the dust. She fucking hates his ass. And it's like, does she have, like... I mean, she's a little justified. He did cheat on her, technically. You get it, right? You get it. But it's like, you know, he did cheat on her. I want to say that they divorced... Oh, I don't know if they ever super clarified it, but I want to say that they officially divorced before he got with Celine. But, like... So that created a lot of, like... There's some feelings from that, right? And he's not going to say, like, you're a bad person for wanting to be with your mom when you were giving birth. He never complained. But there's, like, you know, your thing ended up really causing a lot of problems for me. If you just given birth in the U.S., you know, and we didn't leave, maybe I could have gotten joint custody or something like that, and I wouldn't be in this fucking situation. And that's, like, real shit. And then she tells him, you know, on her own account, right? Like, well, you know, ever since we had kids, I feel like I don't. I feel like this is a very natural, relatable thing for a lot of people. Is that she feels like she's kind of been limited. Like she's this very ambitious woman, and she hasn't been able to do all the things she wants in her life. She hasn't been able to, or she's been so busy, like raising 2 children, and Jesse's busy. He's like, flying off to do writing things, and he spends all this time working, and she doesn't have any time for like hobbies or stuff like that. And she mentions like, oh, he was away for like 6 months or something, and she would, the kids, the twins, they would stay up all night, and because they couldn't get to sleep, and she had to take them out in the stroller, and she almost got mugged and shit, and it's this, she almost got mugged a few times, and he, it's Jesse's face, and he's like, what the, he's like, you never told me, and she goes, yeah, I think I almost got raped one time, but I think he didn't do it because I think he felt so bad for me. And she just makes this little comment like, yeah, it's the best part about being a woman over 30 is you don't get raped or something. Or your chance of going raped goes down. And it's like this fucking little joke she cracks in the middle of this horrible, traumatic story. And it's so real. It feels like a real person telling you all this shit, right? I think he even kind of laughs at it like, fuck. But he's like, why didn't you tell me about? There's this like lack of communication sort of on both of their parts, and it sort of comes from these character traits that have been set up throughout both movies, right? So like Celine, you can believe is the type of person, and she mentions that she's like, oh, when the kids were born, she felt completely unprepared to be a mother. Like once she actually had to do it, she felt completely unprepared, and she had no self-esteem about it, and she just was beating herself up all the time about what a terrible, terrible mother she was being, and she never felt like she could tell Jesse because she was so ashamed. And Jesse was calling her all the time while he was gone, asking her how she is, how she's feeling, how the kid's doing, and you can tell, like, of course he loves his kids, and Jesse, fuck, it's like neither of them are completely wrong, right? Because it's like they have this shit that, like, they don't talk to each other about, that they don't communicate to each other about. That's Celine's thing. You get the impression throughout the first 2 movies that she maybe is a little more reserved with expressing her feelings to people, or things that she doesn't like. Like when she talks to, back to Before Sunrise. When she's talking about how her boyfriend was photographing that homeless person, it reminded me a lot of the scene from Before Sunset where there's a palm, they're sitting down, there's like a palm reader. And the palm reader comes over and she reads Celine's hand, and she gives her this nice flowery thing about how great and how all these places she's going in life, and Celine gives her some money afterwards, and Jesse, who thinks the whole thing is just a bunch of, hullabaloo, basically is like, yeah, okay, whatever, and he's visibly like kind of not interested, and she reads his palm for a second and then says like, he's learning, or something very short and almost catty, and he doesn't give her anything, right? And then he goes off after she's gone about like, what a con artist, and Celine's like, no, I really liked what she had to say, like I liked it, why can't you just let me be happy and not be a fucking dick? Well, she says that later. Sorry, she says that later because Jesse asks her, like, is there anything I've done that, like, really annoys you? And she goes, well, yeah, like, I didn't really like how you acted back there at the palm reader. I thought you were kind of a dick. Like, why couldn't I just be happy with what you said to me? And he's like, fucking fine. Yeah, whatever. Yeah, you're right. Right? And it's I think, like, she could tell that to Jesse, but it was like she couldn't tell that to her war photographer boyfriend. She couldn't say that kind of thing. And even Jesse had to, like, ask her directly and coax it out of her. And, oh, my neck again. I'm so stiff. So stiff. So I can totally believe that Celine would be the type of person to just kind of hide the negative things that she's feeling from another person, from either like shame or not wanting to cause a problem, or it feels in character with her. Now on the flip side, Jesse also has some things that, he's been struggling with. And I think at one point, he basically gets there's like this, again, this like compromised resentment of, I have this diminished relationship with my son indirectly because of my wife, right? And he doesn't blame her. He doesn't really blame her, and he's clearly never brought it up, but it's been on his mind, and he's never really got to say it. Because, like, what the fuck, like, it's not right? Like, it's completely his ex-wife's fault, right? For being a total piece of shit. And trying to hurt him by taking his son away from him. Very, like, jealous, greedy thing that she did. And there's this like one point where, like, with how hard both of them go, where they just want to fight. They just want to have an argument, dude. And, at one point, they say some really nasty shit to each other. Just straight up. They say some nasty shit to each other over the course of this film. And he says, like, I think one of the worst things he says to her is, I fucked up my entire life for you. Because I fucked up my entire life for you and I've never complained. I've never fucking brought it up one time. And you sort of get the idea that both of them have had, to put it in simple terms, both of them have made these extreme sacrifices for one another. And they feel like the other one hasn't really acknowledged it. And part of it is honestly kind of their fault, because they've just never communicated it to each other. And these types of things, I think, happen in probably every relationship, even really good ones, where there's just little things that you have these different narratives building in your head, right? And then suddenly there's something that happens and it triggers a conversation or an argument about it. And you realize, we just had to fucking, like, tell each other how we felt about this thing, and we'll be fine afterwards. The problem is that Jesse and Celine are having this, like, about, like, over 10 years into their relationship. And there's a lot so when it comes up, it's not a little thing, It's not just, like, a little thing we can resolve in a bit. There's a lot of stuff and feelings that have been bubbling and suppressed for a very long time. And this one night that they have to themselves, where their kids aren't around, where they're kind of like, it's almost like they're almost like out of time, like in the first movie. It's almost like they're in this little pocket of time where it's just them, and they've got nothing to worry about until midnight. Until midnight. Because they're leaving, right? It's their last day in Greece. And shit gets really intense. Because they start, it's very similar to how, like, it feels like a real argument in the sense that it's not just one thing. They go through a lot of stuff. They kind of ebb and flow through a lot of different things that have been on their mind. And Celine, they both accuse each other at different points of cheating. They both do. And it's this like fucking shocking, like, Celine says, like, what did you, I've never asked you about, that one night that your phone wasn't working. And he's like, what the fuck are you talking about? She's like, in, like, Warsaw or wherever, and when you were on your book tour. And she's like, did you fuck that fucking little, like, 20-something from the fucking bookstore? And he just looks at her, and you have no idea what he's thinking. You have no idea. And then he doesn't answer it directly, and you're like, no fucking way, dude. There's no way. There's no way you did, right? There's no way. And then he fucking comes back later. He tries to, like, try to move off of it. She brings it back up, and then he counters with, oh, when you visited your ex-boyfriend in France or wherever, from, like, when you were in your 20s, you think I didn't think that you fucked him? And she's so fucking upset when he says it. She gets so fucking mad. She just storms out of the room. She comes back in, and she says, And she says, I'm falling out of love with you. And then she leaves again. And it's like, fuck. It's like fuck. And Jesse's just lying there. And there's a second where he kind of like rubs, I think he does the same. No. She was making a cup of tea. Because there was this bit in the argument where they kind of cool down and they have a more rational discussion, right? They have a little more level-headed discussion about what they should do about Henry. And it's funny because, like, the whole thing gets basically resolved. They both figure out, she both, like, oh god, that's a whole other thing. They get this, like, you're always pretending to be the rational one, but you only pretend like you're all logical when I'm the one who gets upset. And then whenever you're upset, you don't, you know, you're always the logical one then. And they sit down, they have a cool-headed conversation. They basically, and funny enough, she tells him basically that, like, no, if we moved back there, you would see him every other weekend. That's like what? How many times it's like what, 30 times a year? My math is bad. It's not a lot of times a year, and if you factor in when you gotta work and shit like that, she's like, it would make such a little difference for us to uproot our entire lives for every other weekend visitation rights. Because your bitch of an ex-wife is never going to give us joint custody, right? That would be awesome, but she's never going to do it. He's like, yeah, you're right. And it's like the whole thing that kicked this off is kind of resolved. But all this other stuff has come up in the meantime. And she was making some tea, right? She was making some tea. And I don't think she drinks it at all. I don't think she takes a single sip of it. And it's still on the table. And he just stands up after she's left, and she said this to him. She said she's falling out of love. And he looks at the cup of tea. And in my mind, I just think about the final scene of Before Sunset, when she hands him the tea. And that's, you know, the moment that he knows, right? And then it's Celine, and she's sitting by herself at this kind of like lake or like waterside, kind of like outdoorsy seating area at night. There's people around. She's at a table with one chair. And Jesse shows up, and he pulls up a chair, and he does this bit where he pretends like he doesn't know her. And she's very, like, unamused. She's like, okay, whatever okay, yeah, uh-huh. And he pulls out this letter, and he basically tells her that he's a time traveler. And he met her when she's like 80 years old, and she wrote herself a letter. Which I think harkens back to an earlier, I don't know if it was in this movie or the previous one, of him talking about, no, it was a letter, it was in this one. It was a letter that he wrote to himself when he was like 20-something for him to open. Like when he was 18, he wrote a letter to himself to open when he was 40 or something like that. So there's like a reversal of that where he's written a little letter as an 80-year-old Celine to her as like a 40-year-old. And he's reading her this letter, and she's so unamused. And it's not in like a movie way. Like, she is legitimately like, dude, can you fucking drop it? Like, this isn't cute. It's not funny. I'm really fucking upset at you. Like, this is really bad. This is not a funny, cute thing. Like, stop fucking around. And, you know, and he just kind of like folds it up, and he's like, fuck, Celine. Like, I don't like, and all he can really say is, I don't think there's anyone else on this planet who's gonna do as much for you as I have. And not in the sense, I'm like paraphrasing, not in the sense that like she should feel bad or something, but he basically just says, I'm the only person who's going to stick with you through all of this, and I would fucking die if this ended. Like, I legitimately like would never give this up. And she goes, okay. And she's not like suddenly turned around. He hasn't like won her over and the happy music starts playing. She just says, she hears him out and she thinks about it. And she sort of half agrees. And the film just sort of ends on this wide shot of them at, sitting by the water and talking. And she starts to sort of humor his little time travel bit. Because earlier in the film, she did this funny thing where she said, like, oh, I think Jesse would wish he'd just married, like, a dumb bimbo who would just be impressed with everything. And she does this little, ooh, tell me more. And she sort of does, oh. Because she does an American... Julie Delpy herself is French, which I found out after we found out, or I asked Kat about it. Yeah, she is a French actress. And it's really funny because you could tell when, I don't know, her doing an American accent, you can immediately tell when she's like... How do I describe it? It sounds dumb to say that she does a convincing, because she is literally doing an American accent. She sounds like a French person doing an American accent. And she does that, ooh, tell me more. The space and time can continue? Oh, the continuum. Oh, the continuum. And then the movie kind of ends. And you're like, and you don't really know. And it's like... It's ambiguous, and I didn't know how to feel, And are they going to work it out? It almost harkens back to... Here's the funny thing. Before Sunrise ends on a very ambiguous note where you have no idea what's going to happen, right? Before Sunset ends, you're pretty sure you know what the fuck is going to happen, and the characters know what's going to happen. Jesse knows what's going to happen at the very least. And Before Midnight ends much like the first movie. You have no idea. Like, you think that they can, and it reminds me of the scene from the beginning of Before Sunrise where Jesse explains like, well, it depends on. The answer to what you think happened, the answer to what happens after the end of Before Midnight, tells you more about the person who's answering it than the story. Because one type of person is going to say that they don't work it out. The other type of person is going to say that they did. And someone else is going to say, oh, they work it out for a little bit, and then maybe they end up realizing that maybe, they do just need to divorce and things like that. Or there's so many different ways that these two people's lives could go. And, obviously there's people who have talked about like, oh, could they make a fourth movie? I wouldn't want to see a fourth movie. I was very satisfied with Before Midnight as a conclusion to this storyline. I think every single one of these movies every single one could have been the last one, and it would have worked. But as a trilogy, I'm very happy with it. It shows this kind of romance in these three different stages, of growing up, of being this like young 20-something to being older and more established, but still kind of ambitious, and then to being kind of settled and having to deal with what you've got. There's this immediate tension as soon as they get into the hotel, because they're in a box. They're in this little boxed-in room, right? This little boxed-in room. It's dark. It isn't warm like Celine's apartment. There aren't these big windows with natural sunlight and all this. It's this kind of drab looking, honestly kind of drab looking hotel room, and with ugly colors, and it's like their marriage. They're just in this little box and they have to work it out. I think they could. I'm the type of person, I think they do work it out. I think they can. Like, I honestly, if we're going to imagine that they're real people, which they feel like real people, I really do think that if they went to, like, couples therapy and they actually gave it a shot, that their marriage is totally salvageable. It's totally salvageable. I want to believe, I want to believe that what they had in those first two movies is really real. And that they do have the dedication to each other. Or that they just see something inherently in each other that's worth being there for. And they're not just going to stay together because they're kids or something like that. And that they're going to give it a shot. Someone else could say, that you could very reasonably, because I think when I described the end of the film, that I may have made it sound a little too positive, and that's probably because, I have a little bit of a bias. That's because that's my outlook on it. But when you watch it, it's not, right? 1 minute of a goofy little bit that Jesse tries to do is not going to fix everything in their marriage, right? It doesn't mean that, like, Celine is up to, like, even work on it with him. I just want to believe that they are. Right? Like, when I say intent, it's really hard to describe. Like, no, you're fucking in an argument for an hour, and it's really real. And you can't just wipe that away with, like, a funny little time travel bit, God. These are some really good movies. Very different. Very different, each one of them, and in the kind of story that it's telling. Right? Before Sunrise is very much two people. It's entirely two people falling in love. Before Sunset is like it's them rediscovering each other, and then Before Midnight is them kind of coming to grips with a lot of reality. That they've never had the time to before. And like it's so funny that much like in Before Sunset, when they both realize they've got problems, you would think that from the outside that they're doing great. I mean, they're this great couple. They goof around, they joke, they laugh. They seem so in love when they're at the dinner, when they're at the table eating lunch with all their friends, and they have these two great kids. Jesse seems like he really cares for like his son, and Celine, like it's cool. Like, it genuinely makes me feel good that it seems like Celine really loves Henry, right? I think that's really sweet. As like she's like his stepmom, and she seems to really love him. And she wants to be in his life too, and he reciprocates that, and he's a successful writer, and she's an activist, and they're in this beautiful, they're in the southern Peloponnese Islands, and like, what could be going wrong? To speak to Celine just not discussing, like, not telling him when she doesn't want to do something, right? Like, she mentioned at one point, like, she didn't even want to come to Greece. And he's like, you've been fucking having fun on the beach for 6 weeks. You've been having a great time. Like, what are you how was I supposed to know? And does she even blame him? Like, sort of, but like, not really. It's complicated, man. Again, no best actor or actress for either of these people, right? For any of these films, which is insane to me. Because this is like some of the most realistic depiction of two extremely complicated people in a complicated, real relationship I've ever seen. It's so hard to top this. It would be so hard to top this. Man. What a good movie. What a good movie. I would say of the three, my favorite is it's really close. I like them all in different ways, and it's really close between sunrise and sunset. I would say I probably like sunrise. Sorry, I'd probably say I like sunset. Excuse me, a little more. Just because I think what it builds to is a lot. It was a lot more moving for me, and it was a lot more powerful and beautiful, even than the first movie, to be honest. And I thought the first movie was beautiful in its own way. And it's not that I dislike Before Midnight, it's that it's such a different film. But for what it's doing, I think it's fantastic. It's rare to get a film that feels so grounded and realistic to make you feel uncomfortable in the way that it does for a purpose, for a real purpose. Like if I had to rewatch any of them, honestly, either of the first two, I'd be totally down to rewatch. If I was going to show somebody them, I'd definitely obviously start with Before Sunrise, and then like maybe later Sunset. But like, I don't know. I think the context of Before, I don't know. I'd be really curious to know if you watched like one of these, if you just watched like Sunset or Midnight before any of the other ones, if you watch them out of order or something, like, does it work? It probably still works, because the films don't rely too much on like context. But there's enough through them that watching them back to back is very gratifying. Damn, what a good ass series of movies. What a good ass series of movies. Oh, one weird thing in Before Midnight. There's a lot more score in that movie. There's a lot more score, like just soundtrack in there, like a non-diegetic soundtrack compared to the first two. And when I say a lot more, I think like one instance. Wait. I'm just thinking about it right now. So, in the first two films, background music that's, not in the scene. Obviously, there's music that's happening in the scene that you're hearing, that someone's actually literally playing. But other than that, all of the actual like soundtrack plays either at the beginning or the end of the film. And in Before Midnight, I want to say some plays at the beginning, and then it plays at the end. But before that, there's a bit where it plays in the middle. And it's after Celine tells Jesse that she's not in love with him anymore. And she storms out. And Jesse stares at the teacup, and then he stares at the door. And there's a song playing. Oh my god. Was that intentional? Is that like the director's way of telling the audience, again in the language of these films, that this is the end? Or that this could be the end? Because then I think the song stops when we cut to Celine. Like, if the film had cut right there to credits, if the film had cut right there, how different would it be? Right? How different would it be? And Jesse chooses to stop the song from playing. He chooses to keep the movie going. And he says it's not, he makes the decision that it's not going to end here. That's why I believe it. That's why I think they're going to work it out. That's why I think they're going to work it out, baby. Because Jesse, through the language of filmmaking and pattern and establishing and breaking patterns, Jesse has decided, at least on his end, that it's not going to end here. He refuses to let the credits music play. He refuses to let the music play. That's beautiful. If that was intentional, that's wonderful. That's a genius choice. I wonder. I wonder, man.